Do you know why I like BBC iPlayer? It's a doddle to find your favourite TV and radio shows, and you can catch up on programmes you've missed whenever it suits you. Programmes are available for 7 days, but they often make a whole series available, so look out for the series catch-up note here. And I'll tell you what's really neat, they'll even recommend other shows you might want to watch. So why not grab a cuppa and catch up with your favourite shows?
BBC iPlayer, making the unmissable unmissable.
There are times when I just can't handle it. I just can't handle the fact that I'm autistic, whether I like it or not. I'll grow up, yes, but it might take me longer to grow up and adjust than some of the mainstream. You know what I mean? Some of the mainstream origin can grow up just like that. Me, it might take me that little bit longer to learn, adjust, and then grow up.
The Autistic Me, part of the adult season, next Tuesday at 9 on BBC Three.
Now on BBC Two, Monday night's Newsnight with Kirsty Walk.
Billions of pounds of profit. It's business as usual for the banks, but at what cost? Money, money, money. Barclays and HSBC are rolling in it again. Barclays' boss thinks we all benefit from the profits.
Risk-taking by banks is an absolutely essential ingredient of the restoration of growth in the global economy.
And with more results due from taxpayer-supported banks later this week, are the rewards and the risks to us far too high? Iranian CEO Mahmoud Ahmadinejad proclaimed president for now, but with enemies at his back, are his days numbered? Wikipedia reveals the secrets of the famous Rorschach test. A leading psychologist challenges Wikipedia over the damage he believes this will do. And as a budget crisis brings California to its knees, the Terminator slashes spending on everything from education to jails.
This is Folsom Prison on the outskirts of Sacramento, where famously Johnny Cash once entertained the prisoners. In 2009, the Cash has definitely left the building.
Good evening. It was all going to be so different. No inflated salaries, no huge bonuses, and no unsustainable risks. That was the government rhetoric. But after an injection of £1.26 trillion worth of a bailout, this week the banks deliver their half-year results, and the reality will be very different. Today, Barclays and HSBC share price jumped after they announced multi-billion-pound profits generated by their investment businesses. In both banks, the retail business has halved. And later this week, we'll get the story from the partially nationalised banks, including Lloyds Banking Group and RBS. And of course, we now know too that Sir Stephen Hester, the new chief executive of RBS Group, which is 70% taxpayer-owned, is in line for a whopping £9.6 million pay packet if he turns the bank around. Here's Richard Watson.
Walking around the city, it's clear there's massive amounts of money here, from the well-manicured gardens to the glitzy buildings. But are we back to the boom years? I've spent the afternoon in the City of London trying to work this out, because two of Britain's biggest banks have announced huge profits. Barclays announced half-year profits of £2.9 billion, while HSBC made £5 billion, and most of it comes from investment banking. But what level of bonus will be paid? Some commentators argued that the profits imply that, on average, each member of staff in its 22,000-strong investment banking arm could be in line for £100,000, and that, of course, would leave room for some huge individual payouts. Barclays denied this today, but defended the use of bonus payments.
This is a hot topic. People have very strong views about it. I absolutely understand that. On the other hand, I also understand that our customers and our shareholders expect Barclays to feel the best people. This is an industry, it's a service industry. The strategies that we employ on behalf of particular customer segments, they're not that different. The difference is in execution, and in execution the difference is in people. So my obligation as chief executive is to field the best team that I can. That's what our customers expect. That's what our shareholders expect.
Both Barclays and HSBC argue they're different from banks bailed out by the taxpayer. In fact, a public relations man for HSBC called up tonight to say they were proudly independent of needing government support. But critics say it's not as simple as that. Total support for the banks from British taxpayers amounts to £1.26 thousand billion. Less than 10% of that, £94 billion, has gone to the banks in direct payments. £585 billion has gone to create an emergency fund to shore up banks if they should need it, and £300 billion has been made available to underwrite bad debts. So while Barclays and HSBC can fairly claim not to have received direct subsidies, they, along with all banks, benefit indirectly from the vast state aid which has shored up the entire system. Here's a rarity, a world-class banker, a former banker, who thinks bankers are overpaid. Philip Auger spent his life in the city in a series of high-profile banking jobs, but left 9 years ago disillusioned by an Anglo-American banking model which he says was creating a kind of hyper-reality with astronomical levels of executive pay.
It's this business model that they operate which enables them to gives them a very good world view. It enables them to operate, to act for the buyer and the seller in a trade, and sometimes to take a turn out of the middle themselves. It's an incredibly powerful position. It's riddled with conflict of interest, and it gives them a great advantage over other market users.
To a certain degree, is this a one-way bet?
I sometimes think of it as heads we win, tails you lose.
We wanted to ask the investment bankers about all this, but firms duck for cover. What about the British Bankers Association? No comment. How about their trade body, the London Investment Bankers Association? Well, no joy there. They've got about 10 directors, but they're not willing to talk to us, or not able to talk to us today. Apparently the Director General, Jonathan Taylor, is in back-to-back meetings all day and can't spend a couple of minutes to come on Newsnight and talk about executive remuneration and bonus culture. So there we have it. But there's a fascinating court case which gives an insight into this world. When the German Commerzbank took over Dresdner Kleinwort early this year, it ordered a freeze on bonuses because it said the investment team had presided over huge and unprecedented financial losses. So the German chief exec said they should sacrifice their bonuses, some running into millions of pounds. Over at Dresdner, 4 bankers sued their new employer, arguing their individual performance meant they were worth it, and it was in their contracts. They won. Lawyers for the 4 men told us this case hinged on simple contract law. Elsewhere, other cases are being prepared. One leading city lawyer interrupted his meeting with traders upset at not receiving their bonuses to speak to us tonight.
I've seen a number of people who've consulted me about their bonuses. Sometimes they've been promised bonuses, they've been guaranteed particular levels of bonus, and then the bank has changed its mind. It said, well, public opinion has moved against us, we'd like to defer the bonus, we'd like to alter your bonus arrangements, and they've come to see me and asked, what are my legal rights? And I've answered that question.
And what do you tell them?
Well, if there is a real contract, a contractual obligation, then the bank is expected to honour it.
Trades unions are deeply critical of the bonus culture and fear another round is on the way.
The evidence is absolutely clear. There are some who have learned nothing from the debacle of the past, a debacle that has put at risk the jobs of hundreds of thousands that we represent. And I question their values, the values of a society where an investment banker can get in a bonus in 1 year what would pay for 100 home helps.
The city, of course, contributes billions of pounds to the exchequer, and while the good times rolled, few complained about the level of pay. The question now is, can Parliament curb the bonus culture? The Treasury Select Committee, for example, has complained that so far precious little has been achieved.
Richard Watson. Well, joining me now in the studio are John McFall, Labour Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesman Vince Cable. From Cardiff, we're joined by Peter McNamara, the former Managing Director of the Alliance in Leicester, and from Bristol by Gillian Tett of the Financial Times. First of all, Vince Cable, you should be delighted today by the story from Barclays and HSBC. Pre-tax profits of this magnitude, the share price jumps, that's good for business, isn't it?
No, and I'm not delighted, and I'm very concerned, particularly when you look at where the increased profit margins have come from, where the bonuses have come from. Partly it's come from British domestic business, bigger spreads, businesses that are already on the margin, finding it very difficult to raise capital, being squeezed out by the banks. But more important, a lot of it coming from investment banking. Of course, a lot of that's trading in government securities. But high-risk activities ultimately underwritten by the taxpayer, and that's wrong.
But the high-risk activities, if they deliver, also put more money into Treasury coffers.
But when they don't deliver, of course, they go bust with
But
spectacular effects.
but John Varley says they are delivering.
Well, Richard Barley also, well, John Varley also claimed today that, of course, there is no proof that the big investment banks were inherently risky. But we have now, we've had the experience of Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns last year, went bust, in Lehman's case, having catastrophic effect on the whole system. Thing could happen again, and it's taxpayer underwritten. That's wrong.
Peter McNamara, is that what it looks like from where you sit? What? I mean, we're not talking about banks so far in Barclays and HSBC, which are partly owned, of course, by us. We're talking about a different magnitude of bank, and these banks, by all accounts, have done well today.
Yes, they have, and you can be, frankly, the terrible news would be if these banks had done really badly, we'd be faced with another round of rescuing other banks, which would have been catastrophic for the taxpayer, and very bad news for the consumers and the businesses that they support. So at that level, we have to be jolly grateful that HSBC has turned in quite a reasonable result, and Barclays have really done pretty well altogether. So that's generally quite good news.
When you talk about the consumers, there's two different things here, isn't there? Because there are the shareholders, of course, who are likely to do well, share prices up. There are the customers, the retail banking sector, that's not doing so well at all. In fact, it could be masking the real big problems, not only in retail but in bad debt.
Well, certainly there's some evidence that retail banking is going to suffer higher bad debts going forward. That's frankly to be expected at this point in an economic cycle. The good news from Barclays is that their investment banking arm is doing well, and HSBC, which has proportionally less of an investment banking arm, really most of the countries in which it operates have been doing pretty well, apart from the US, where they've had huge problems with household.
John McFall, do you take such a dismal view of today's figures as Vince Cable does?
Well, I'm quite happy to welcome when banks are turning in profit. But let's be sensible here and see the background against which they're operating. First of all, bank lending has gone down. Who said that? Only last week at the Treasury Secretary, 2 weeks ago, when the Governor of the Bank of England came. So 2009 is a year of contraction for bank lending. And secondly, when the Governor came along, he was talking about this bonus culture. And the bonus culture is not acceptable, not through envy or jealousy. The bonus culture is not acceptable because what the Governor said was very sensible. And he said that the interests of the bank are not aligned to this bonus culture, and the long-term future of the banks can be threatened. And it's a one-way bet. Heads they win, tails they win.
And we will come
Profits
on specifically.
Are privatised, losses are socialised.
Yeah, and at the end we'll come on specifically to see what you make about Sir Stephen Hester, given that UKFI were involved in that. But let's stick with what's going to happen later in the week, because we're going to see a series of figures coming out of banks in which the taxpayer has obviously a big stake. If these banks turn out to be putting up profits in their investment arm, will that be good or bad for the British taxpayer?
Kirsty, David Miles, a member of the Monetary Policy Committee, when he came for his confirmation hearing a few weeks ago to the Treasury Committee, said we cannot forget that banks are on life support. They're on life support because the taxpayer has put £1.3 trillion there, and they are still in a fragile state. So don't let us run away with bank profits today. I think Vince will agree with
It also
that.
depends what the profits are used for. Because if they're used for putting out credit to credit-worthy borrowers, good British companies, that's fine. If they're simply used to pile up reserves in nationalised banks, completely pointless because they're nationalised, that's very damaging.
Gillian Tett, let's separate the rhetoric from the reality, because it was in January that Lord Miners, rather perhaps the new business minister, said the golden days of huge bonuses, investment banking are all gone. There's no sign of that, is there?
Not at all. I mean, I think that many bankers at the moment are thinking if they can just hunker down for a bit, wait for a little while, they'll be back to business as usual. What is quite extraordinary is the speed with which the large banks have regrouped and are rallying to fight off the political pressure for meaningful change. And you shouldn't lose sight of the fact that one of the reasons why big banks are making these big profits is because there are fewer of them. And in sectors ranging from retail banking through to the wholesale markets, the fact there are fewer of them means they have more concentration of power and they can get much bigger spreads. They can basically take bigger commissions and fees.
In your view, when the government had to ratchet up the rhetoric to assuage the voters' fears and to show they were doing something, did they sell us a very simplistic prospectus about what they were able to do about both high salaries and bonus culture?
Well, at the moment, the government's caught between a rock and hard place because voters are angry at the sight of bankers making these big bonuses when they've been supported by taxpayers. But the government also knows that it needs the banks to actually become profitable again to stabilise the system. So it needs to keep bankers working, if you like. And most importantly of all, that if the UK were to act alone in terms of trying to clamp down in an aggressive, prescriptive manner on the bankers, if it didn't act with international coordination, there is a real risk that the business could simply rush out of the UK. And thus far, one of the tragedies of the crisis is that at the very time that you need meaningful international coordination to try and change the way that finance operates, the severity of the crisis means there's a growing tendency for each country to look inwards and to take measures without that type of international coordination.
And we have a situation where the ones that are really going to win out of this are the big contractual lawyers, because as we've seen from the Dresdner Kleinwort case, a lot of these contracts for bonuses are cast iron, and we're going to see a lot of the same sort of stuff, aren't we?
You have a lot of
sorry, Vince Cable on that one, yeah.
Yes, indeed. And so, I think the problem with bonuses, it's been very clear for a long time what the basic things that needed to be done, and they haven't been done. I mean, it was acknowledged a few months ago, there was a consensus that bonuses had to be established in such a way they didn't add to the risk of institutions. The FSA has not acted on it, the government's not acted on it.
Peter McNamara, then when it comes to sanctions then and tightening controls on bank pay, do you think anything meaningful will actually be done?
I think so. I think, to be very fair, a lot of banks have been trying to gain those bonus rewards more closely to the shareholders' interests, and don't forget, we as taxpayers are shareholders in many of those banks. So for some of those banks, there's been some higher degree of alignment there. There's now a degree of caution, I think, in boardrooms about the excessive bonus culture. Having said all of that, you have to remember the good news, and the good news is quite serious, that if those banks that have been away from direct government support that we've just heard about today, HSBC and Barclays, had run into big problems today, we'd have been faced by yet another major crisis.
Let's stick with the sanctions.
What's going to be interesting is the recovery that we see out of Royal Bank of Scotland and the Lloyds Banking Group later on this week.
Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt you on that. I just wanted to pick up on the sanctions point with John McFall. You weren't tough enough in sanctions, were you?
No, I don't think people have been tough enough. And I mean, I don't see any caution on behalf of bankers today. I mean, I think they're euphoric because, as Gillian Tett said, they put their head under the radar and it's now business as usual. And the issue of bonuses, having deferred bonuses, having screw bonuses taken away and separate, having them paid back after 8 or 9 years if the business isn't doing well, that's all been forgotten. And the challenge now is for the government, for the regulator and for the Bank of England. And we haven't come on to this issue of macroprudential tools, and it's very important we discuss this tonight, Kirsty.
We'll do very quickly.
Yeah, well, the Governor and the FSA said that they will have regulatory measures, tax and size, etc., and they're going to come out with these in the autumn. This is essential because we have to skin this cat. We've not skinned it yet, and we've got to do it.
But there's some simple things could be done even before you start creating sanctions. We don't know who the people are who are earning these vast salaries and bonuses. Let's be transparent. I mean, Lord Miners took this point up at the weekend, but the government can enact this very quickly, just getting it out into the open. Who are the highly bonused people? Getting them properly
Gillian Tett, do you think that is a legitimate aim, and do you think it will happen?
I think that is a legitimate aim, though. I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact, though, the other big problem is that at the moment the banks are still so interconnected that you have a situation where you can't let a big investment bank collapse yet. You don't have the tools in place. And as long as you have that situation, the government has to have that implicit support there. And as long as you have that implicit support there, it looks completely disgusting to most ordinary taxpayers to have these bankers taking the bonuses. Well, that is a fundamental contradiction
Peter
right
McNamara,
now.
let's just pick up very briefly. We're going to hear about RBS Group much later in the week. Indeed, it's on Friday. We own 70% of RBS at the moment. We may have to pick up some more. So Stephen Hester is in line for more than £9 million in salary if he performs at the bank. That, of course, was set up after UKFI. Do you think he would deserve that if he turns the bank around?
Well, I think it's set upon how much of the share price he can recover. And the reason for doing that really is so that the government, on behalf of the taxpayers, can hopefully sell back that stake into the marketplace if that bank's seen as performing well.
I just want to ask John before that, do you think Sir Stephen Hester should get that if he delivers well? What signal does that send?
Sir Stephen Hester's package is the same as Ronaldo's package in the first year at Real Madrid. So there you are.
Thank you all very much indeed.
It's a good way of looking at it.
2 former Iranian presidents were amongst the leading political figures in Iran who boycotted today's ceremony, officially declaring the presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Such is the strength of the opposition, and despite the crackdown, claims of torture and the show trials of 100 protesters. Ahmadinejad is also likely to have trouble assembling a cabinet, all of which suggests his position may soon be fatally undermined. Here is Gordon Carrera.
Today, Iran's 2 leading men entered into an awkward embrace. This morning, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, formally gave his blessing to the protégé whose position he's protected. President Ahmadinejad had said it would be foolish to try and split the 2 men because they were like father and son. But the strained body language spoke of a different story, trouble in the family. The tension is even clearer if you compare today with the same event 4 years ago. This morning's ceremony was also notable for its absentees, opposition candidate Mir Hossein Mousavi and the 2 previous presidents, Hashemi Rafsanjani and Mohammad Khatami, all of whom questioned the legitimacy of June's election.
At first, Ayatollah Khamenei was supporting Ahmadinejad beyond belief, siding with a relative junior in the name of Ahmadinejad and disenchanting political heavyweights such as Rafsanjani and Khatami and Mousavi. However, I think he soon realized that he's probably gone too far and he's probably made a mistake. And I think that's why he's gently been changing that position into a more critical position against Ahmadinejad.
The main feature on Iranian state TV this weekend was edited highlights of what looked to some like show trials. Among the defendants was a former vice president. Pictures of him before and after his confession are telling. His wife is reported to have said he lost 10 kilos since being imprisoned. One former opposition figure who was forced to confess on TV in 1999 remembers the experience all too well.
In fact, me and my interrogators served as elements of a film. They did some modification, change, and asked me to change the draft. After finishing that, several times I practiced that draft, that text, in front of the camera in the prison.
The trials look like a warning shot to the opposition, a sign of what may be in store for even more senior figures who persist in their dissent. The move has caused shock, but it's unlikely to end the disunity within the country and within the Iranian elite. And that disunity has potentially serious consequences. The complex internal plotting comes as the international script reaches a key moment. The divisions matter because the leadership may soon have a nuclear option. Iran denies it wants the bomb, but some analysts believe it could prepare a weapon within a few years, or even months, a decision in the hands of the present leadership. President Obama reached out to Iran with an offer of dialogue in March, but he had set a deadline of September for a response before he considered tough new sanctions.
My administration is now committed to diplomacy.
One senior Iranian official said his country wants